Hey everyone, how you doing today? Old Dad Discovers channel, and I'm going for an early morning walk. And if you can tell, those who know, I'm a big fan of the San Francisco 49ers, an American football team that plays out of Sunnyvale, California, but they're called San Francisco because that's where the team originally played. And I've been a big fan since I was a teen. And I'm still a huge fan now, watching American football, even though I live in Vietnam. And today I want to talk about something that may sound very funny to a lot of people, but I'm gonna share about something called fantasy football. So this episode is about Old Dad Discovers fantasy football. While it's not really a new discovery, it's something that I've been engaged with and playing for quite a long time. And it's not something to be ashamed of. And so let me give a brief explanation why, okay? And I'm sure there's a lot of wives out there or girlfriends out there who are like, oh my God, he's a 54-year-old man and father of two and still playing fantasy football. What is that all about? Well, I'll share with you the story, okay? I've always been a big football fan. Always wanted to play it when I was in high school. But of course, it's quite a noisy day today. Lots of big trucks, a lot of noisy trucks. So this is also a test of recording out on the streets on these walk and talks. But anyways, huge football fan, always wanted to play, but of course, having Vietnamese parents, I would say in general, Asian parents, there's no way, there's hardly any way that you're gonna play football, for one, because I'm not particularly big in stature, very normal for a Vietnamese. So I guess being in the American system, about 5'8". Of course, that's originally where I think I was, 5'8", 5'9". But obviously, as you age, there's a little bit of scrunching, so I think I probably have gotten shorter. But I guess if you translate that to meters now that in Vietnam, we live by the kind of the metric system, right? Then I'm about 1.76 meters. And so, and I don't weigh very much. So probably about 150, 160 pounds, or now, or when I was in high school, a lot lighter than that. But now I'm like about 76 kilograms. So yeah, as compared to people or players who play American football, depending on the position, it's quite small for any position. And of course, lacking the speed as well. But lots up here, in terms of strategy, but obviously not physically endowed enough to play American football at any level, probably not even at the high school level. So I did tennis. But anyways, I've always loved American football, still do now, having lived in Vietnam for the past 20 years. Still follow my team, the San Francisco 49ers. And they haven't been not successful. They've been successful, but they haven't been able to win the big one since back in the days when Joe Montana was quarterback and then Steve Young winning a Super Bowl. So 5 total. And I hope we return to the glory days, especially under head coach Kyle Shanahan. It'd be awesome to see him get the monkey off of his back in the way that Steve Young did, kind of coming out of the shadows of Joe Montana to finally win one. It'd be great to see Kyle Shanahan do that as well, having lost 2 Super Bowls as a coach. And before that, Jim Harbaugh having lost 1. So 3 unsuccessful trips to the Super Bowl, which, we think about the 80s and 90s, that was not a situation. We were pretty much, when we got to the Super Bowl, we were 5 for 5. So I'd like to see Kyle Shanahan join the ranks of Bill Walsh and George Seifert and win one. That would be awesome. Not even one, win a few. And this year, of course, they've gone very young. So lots of rookies that they've drafted, and hopefully that pans out. So keeping my fingers crossed. But anyways, let's talk about fantasy football. What is fantasy football? Fantasy football is basically a game where a bunch of guys get together to then conduct a draft, kind of like similar to the NFL draft, where you end up picking players, either following 2 systems. So one could be what we call the snake system, where everybody's out of 10 or 12 players or 16 players, depending on your league, then select players who are actual NFL players, but obviously you are selecting them with the hope that during the season they will do particularly well, because whatever stats they produce are the stats that your team will then have. So if you pick offensive players, then you obviously want them to throw for many yards if it's a quarterback, catch for many yards, and touchdowns, right? So those equal points for a fantasy football team. And so you want to make sure that you draft well, and you hope during the season that the players that you draft don't get injured, because if they get injured in real life, then that's obviously has repercussions on your team, as they won't be available. And so you have to play players that, are on your bench, who you normally don't play to count towards your team score. And you have to play them, and generally, if they're on your bench, that means that they are not highly valued at the beginning of the season, but have potential. Because who knows, there are some players who you could draft very high or select very high, but don't perform due to various reasons. They don't get as much playing time, or they make too many mistakes and they fumble the ball if they're on offense and drop the ball. And they might just be injured too, or often injured, and so they're not getting as much playing time. And then that gives a chance for somebody who's normally a bench player or a fringe player who normally does not get much playing time to then all of a sudden excel, score well, and then have much more value. And similar to actual football, there's actually a way for people who play fantasy football, or we call them managers of teams, to trade players as well. And so if I have a player, too many players at a particular position, generally mostly on offense, too many wide receivers that I can't play all, and I've got a few on the bench, but I'm lacking in a running back who would carry the ball, or even my quarterback gets injured, I can trade for another player. So that's also a possibility. So there's that. The whole game is all about managing a team. And generally there's, obviously at the end of the season or towards the end of the season, there's actually a playoff where the top 4 to 6 teams then get to compete in a playoff where loser goes home and winners advance into the semifinals and or finals to win a championship. And the championship means bragging rights, right? And also there might be a trophy involved, there might be certain incentives involved if you're the winner. But the big thing is about the bragging rights. You get to show off your trophy, your digital trophy, but also talk a bit of smack with the people that you play with, having won. So that's it in a nutshell. It's a game that mostly bros or guys play. So, but don't get me wrong, there are a lot of female players who follow the NFL or follow football that also play, and they're also very good. So it's a fun game. So anyways, we're at the beginning of August and we're getting ready for the next season. So right now it's the preseason where new players are getting a chance to show their talent and hopefully make the roster. And this is the real season. So it's quite exciting. And today, of course, on Sunday morning, because of the time difference, the San Francisco 49ers are actually playing a preseason game. And so it's exciting for football to be back. And of course, being here in Vietnam, I don't have access to the games. There's no national or even local broadcast. So in order for me to watch it, then I have to have a subscription to NFL.com or one of those channels that cover the NFL. And so I generally don't get to watch the games at all. And so a lot of what I do, a lot of the choices that I make are based on review, listening to the news for injuries, and also following stats. Yeah, the data, okay? So on this walk and talk, I want to talk about this, and I have been talking about this. And at the same time, it's also the launch of this series where I talk a little bit about how I am involved in fantasy football in 2 leagues that have two different ways to draft. So one of them I did mention earlier, which is the snake draft, where you're given a draft position. And in my league that I play with, there's actually 12 players. So if you pick, let's just say in the rounds, the selection you go from, if you get a pick slot that is early in the draft, like let's just say if I get the first slot in round 1, then as it snakes around to round 2, I will have the 24th pick, and it goes around like a snake. And so generally it's good to be early in the draft so that you get the players in the first round that you like, but sometimes it's randomly chosen, and sometimes you get the last pick in the first round, or number 12. But then you immediately get the next pick, which is 13, and it snakes around in the later rounds. So that's one way to draft players. And the other way is the auction, where you're given a certain amount of budget, and then there's an auction, as though you're auctioning for antiques, and you can just bid for the player. So the winning bid, the highest bid, generally gets the player. And so you might value a certain player, and others value different players, and you bid for it. And this is, I guess, the most fair way, because now every player is on the table. But if everybody's vying for the same player, then obviously the cost will be really high and the number gets bid up. So that's where it could get very interesting. And so I do two different types of draft, which is also very cool. Okay, since I'm doing different duties, I'm also doing the walk and talk for my health, but I'm also going to a shop to pick up some goods for my wife. So doing triple duty, but it's also fun because it makes the early morning walks really fun, but also very useful, in the sense that I get to tell a story, share about something that I do, but at the same time also get healthy and also pick up something for my wife at a place called Anam, which is like a small grocery type store that carries more Western or international selections of food. And they also have a bakery, which I think my wife and kids like some of the cakes and that they sell there, and generally very fresh. But I like to pick up the hummus and have some hummus with pita, because hummus is quite good and it's also healthy. So I'm nearing the store, and I'll shut the camera off for a little bit, and I'll pick it back up after I do the grocery purchase. Hence, I'm wearing the bag and trying to be sustainable and not use a plastic bag to carry the groceries on my trip back. Okay, so I'm nearly there, and I'll continue this fantasy football discussion in a little bit. Cheers.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Old Dad Discovers.